My name is Monica Rivers, and the day I found out my sister abandoned her son like yesterday's trash, something inside me broke. Months later, when I watched Ethan perform surgery on her after her car crash and heard him say, "You're alive because she asked me to, not because you're my mother," I knew justice had found its voice. Tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments. I want to know how far this story travels. It was a sticky Thursday night in Austin, Texas. The kind of night where the ceiling fans do more harm than good, just pushing warm air around like lazy ghosts. I stood in the middle of my sister Ashley's cluttered kitchen, surrounded by half-empty wine bottles, unopened mail, and a sink full of crusted dishes. But none of that mattered compared to what she just said. "Where is Ethan?" I asked, my voice tighter than piano wire. Ashley didn't flinch. She just leaned against the counter, flicking ash into an already full tray. "I gave him up to the shelter." My ears rang. "What shelter?" I took a step forward, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "What are you talking about?" she sighed, slow and theatrical, as if I'd interrupted her from something very important. "St. Joseph's, the one on Fifth. Monica, he wasn't right. He gave me the creeps. Always staring, not talking, it was too much." My heart dropped like an elevator cable snapped. "You gave him away like a broken appliance." "Oh, come on," she scoffed, tossing her cigarette into the sink. "You don't know what it was like. He barely spoke. He'd wet the bed. He kept drawing. Weird stuff." "He's your son," I shouted. "And he's not normal," she snapped back. There it was, cold, clean, final, her reason. I felt something rise in me, something I hadn't felt since our mother died and I was the one holding everything together while Ashley partied her way through every failure. Anger, yes, but deeper than that. It was grief laced with betrayal, the kind you don't recover from. "You didn't even call me," I whispered. Ashley rolled her eyes. "So you could guilt me, please?" I stood there for another heartbeat, staring at the woman I used to share bunk beds with, the woman who used to braid my hair while we watched cartoons. I don't know who this was anymore. Maybe I never did. My phone was already in my hand. "What shelter?" I asked again, voice like ice. "St. Joseph's," she repeated, bored now. "You're not actually thinking of picking him up, are you?" I turned without a word, grabbing my keys from the chipped ceramic bowl by the door. Behind me, Ashley called out, "You always were dramatic, Monica." I didn't answer. I was already out the door, out of that house, out of that nightmare. My hands were shaking as I slid into the car, the engine roaring to life beneath my trembling foot. It was raining. I hadn't even noticed until the windshield fogged up. Ethan, my nephew, 7 years old. Left in a shelter like a sack of laundry. The only thing I could think about as I sped through the dark streets was his face. I hadn't seen him in over a year. Ashley had always made excuses. "He's sick, he's tired, you don't need to visit today." I should have pushed harder. I should have known. My eyes stung as red lights turned green, one after another, as if the city itself wanted me to get to him faster. My brain played cruel movies in my head. Ethan curled up in some strange bed, surrounded by strangers, thinking he wasn't wanted. How many nights had he cried? How many days had he waited for his mother to come back? And she never did. The shelter came into view like a prison in a storm. Brick, sterile, uninviting. My chest tightened as I pulled into the lot, headlights illuminating the rain-slicked sidewalk. I didn't even turn the engine off. I just left the keys in the ignition, door swinging open into the downpour. I didn't know what I would say when I found him. I didn't even know what they'd tell me, but one thing was already clear. I was going to find Ethan. And I was never, ever going to let him be discarded again. The next morning broke in slow silence. I hadn't slept. I'd spent the night pacing between the living room and kitchen, rereading the shelter's website, calling their emergency line, leaving messages. At 6:58 a.m., I was already parked outside St. Joseph's, waiting for the staff to unlock the front doors. It looked more like a clinic than a children's shelter. Clean, yes, but cold. All beige bricks and dusty flower beds. A place built for function, not comfort. I pulled my cardigan tighter across my chest as I stepped through the automatic doors. "Can I help you, ma'am?" The receptionist looked up, her voice clipped from too many years in this kind of place. I forced calm into my voice. "I'm looking for my nephew, Ethan Whitlow. He was brought here sometime in the past week. His mother is Ashley Whitlow." The woman typed something, glanced at a screen, then nodded. "1 moment, please. I'll have a caseworker come speak with you." Minutes passed in that waiting room, each one heavier than the last. I could hear a television in the background playing cartoons with the volume turned low. A girl no older than 5 sat hugging a stuffed rabbit, rocking slightly on a plastic chair. No one should ever look that old at 5. Then a tall man in a navy fleece approached. "Ms. Rivers," he asked gently. "I'm Jeremy, Ethan's intake coordinator." I stood too fast. "Is he okay?" Jeremy gave a tight smile. "Physically, yes, he's quiet, withdrawn, but cooperative. I was actually just about to check in on him. You can come with me." The corridor we walked down buzzed with the kind of fluorescent lights that made your skin look gray. The walls were covered in faded murals, attempts at cheerfulness that only made the emptiness worse. And then we turned a corner. There, sitting cross-legged on a wooden bench, was Ethan. He was thinner than I remembered. Pale. His dark curls were longer, messier, and his hands were folded neatly in his lap like he was trying to take up less space. His eyes stayed locked on the floor. "Ethan," my voice cracked. He looked up slowly, cautiously, and stared at me with blank recognition. "It's Aunt Monica," I whispered, kneeling beside him. "I'm here to take you home." No spark, no tears, no resistance, just quiet. He didn't reach for me, but he didn't pull away either when I held out my hand. Jeremy gave a small nod. "We'll get the release paperwork started." The car ride was silent. Ethan stared out the passenger window, watching the city blur past. I didn't push him, didn't fill the space with questions. I just kept glancing at him, memorizing the curve of his jaw, the way his hands clutched the seatbelt strap, not in fear exactly, but in that careful way of someone bracing for the next bad thing. When we reached my house, I guided him in gently. "This is your room now," I said, opening the door to the guest room. "It's not much yet, but we'll fix it up however you want." He looked at the bed like it was a foreign object. I had to stop myself from crying. In the kitchen, I heated up a pot of chicken noodle soup, the real kind, not the canned stuff. I poured it into a wide bowl and placed crackers on the side, then brought it to the small table where he sat, rigid. "You don't have to eat all of it," I said softly, setting the bowl down. "Just take a bite if you want." He didn't move at first. Then, with a hesitation that nearly broke me in half, he picked up the spoon. One scoop, then another. No words, but he didn't stop eating until the bowl was nearly empty. I crouched beside him. "I'm so glad you're here," I whispered. "You're safe now, I promise." He turned his head slightly toward me, eyes still unreadable. But for the first time since we'd left the shelter, I saw a flicker, not quite hope. Not yet. But something softer than before. "Do you want to rest?" I asked. Ethan nodded once. I guided him back to his room, helped him climb into the bed, and pulled the blanket over him. He curled up on his side like a question mark, facing the wall. I sat in the doorway for a long while, just watching him breathe. He was here, in my home, in my care. Ashley had tried to erase him, but I wouldn't let her. That night, after washing the soup bowl and setting a glass of water by his bed, I sat quietly on the edge of the mattress while Ethan curled into the far side, facing the wall. His small shoulder blades jutted up beneath the thin fabric of his shirt like folded wings. It broke my heart in 1,000 places. The lamp on the nightstand cast a warm amber glow across the pale walls, but the room still felt like it held its breath. I didn't know what to say that wouldn't sound like a lie or a promise too big for a kid to believe, so I didn't say much. Just sat there, hands folded in my lap, counting his breaths. Gentle, shallow inhales. His fingers were clenched into the edge of the blanket like he was anchoring himself there. I wanted to ask him what she'd said to him, what she'd done, but I knew those answers weren't mine to pull out. They'd have to come when he was ready. Before I left the room, I reached out and lightly tucked the blanket closer to his chest. He didn't flinch, but he didn't acknowledge it either. Still, it felt like something. When I closed the door behind me, I leaned against it for a long moment, letting the weight of the day settle in. My throat ached, not from tears, I hadn't let myself cry yet, but from holding back everything I wanted to scream at Ashley. How could she have looked at that boy, at that fragile shell of a child, and thought disposable? The next few days blurred together in quiet struggle. Ethan didn't speak, not even a whisper. He didn't make eye contact either. When I spoke to him, gently, always gently, his eyes would drift just past my face like he was looking for the nearest exit. He avoided touch. If I moved too quickly or reached to hand him something, he'd shrink back like a startled animal. Once, when I walked into the kitchen and found him crouched beneath the table holding a piece of toast, I pretended I hadn't seen him and backed out quietly. Later that day, I found him in the hall closet, curled up between an old vacuum and a stack of board games, knees hugged tight to his chest. I sat down outside the door and just started talking, voice low and calm. Not about him, but around him. Nonsense things like the bird feeder I needed to refill, the weird neighbor who had 3 identical lawn gnomes, how I used to think the moon followed me when I was his age. I never asked questions, never demanded attention. I just wanted him to know I was there. On the 3rd night, I made grilled cheese and tomato soup for dinner. I left his plate on the table and turned my back, washing dishes while pretending not to notice that he slowly emerged from the hallway, took his seat, and finished every bite. That same night, as I tucked him in again, I knelt down beside the bed and folded my arms on the edge of the mattress. He was curled on his side again, eyes open but still far away. "You don't have to talk, buddy," I said softly. "You don't even have to look at me, but I just want you to know something." He blinked once. "You're safe here, that's not gonna change." He didn't move, didn't nod. But when I stood to leave, I noticed the tiniest shift in the blanket, a slow, barely, there pull to cover his shoulder where it had slipped. And that night, for the first time, I allowed myself to cry. Not loud, not messy, just quiet tears as I sat in the living room holding an old baby photo of Ethan I'd found in one of my boxes from years ago. He was a toddler in that picture, pudgy cheeks and wild curls, wearing a mismatched pair of pajamas and beaming like someone who knew he was loved. I wanted to bring that version of him back, but I wasn't naive. This wasn't going to be fast or easy. Healing never is. Still, even with all the silence and space between us, I could feel something shifting. Subtle as it was, he was eating. He was sleeping through the night. And he hadn't tried to run. That counted for something. 2 weeks passed in slow, uncertain inches. I measured time in bowls of soup and bedtime rituals, in quiet mornings folding laundry while Ethan sat on the floor with a blanket draped over his shoulders like a shield. The silence between us no longer felt like rejection, just distance. A careful one, like he was still deciding if I'd leave too. Every day I showed up the same way. Warm meals, gentle routines, zero pressure. I started leaving out a few picture books and colored pencils on the coffee table just in case. At first, nothing. Then one day I found a drawing tucked between 2 cushions on the couch, a crayon sketch of what looked like a treehouse. It was rough, rushed, but there were details, a pulley system, a telescope. I didn't mention it. I just pinned it to the fridge. A few days later, I found another one. A detailed picture of a brain, of all things, with what looked like nerve pathways scribbled in marker. That one made me pause. "Buddy," I said softly while setting a snack plate next to him on the carpet, "was this yours?" He didn't respond, but he didn't run either. And when I left the room and came back, the drawing was gone. Late one evening, I was sitting on the couch with my laptop balanced on my knees, trying to finish a grant application for the community literacy center I worked with part-time. It was after 10. Ethan had been in bed for over an hour. House was still except for the hum of the fridge and the quiet clicking of my keys. And then I heard it, bare feet against the floorboards. I looked up just as he appeared at the end of the hallway, his face barely lit by the lamp glow. He was holding a sheet of printer paper in both hands, clutching it like it might blow away. He hesitated. Then, slowly, he walked over and placed the paper on the coffee table next to me. I blinked down at it, then at him. The drawing was stunning. A human heart. Not the red Valentine's kind, but anatomically correct. Meticulously outlined and shaded. Labeled with tiny, neat handwriting. Aorta, ventricle, pulmonary artery, vena cava. I couldn't speak. "You drew this?" I finally asked, barely above a whisper. Ethan gave the smallest nod. His hands stayed clenched at his sides. I looked up into his eyes, and for the first time he didn't look away. "It's beautiful," I said. "Where did you learn all this?" He shifted, eyes flicking to the floor, and then, in a voice so quiet I almost didn't catch it, he said, "I want to be a doctor." The room fell into stunned silence. My heart stopped. He said it again, a little louder this time. "I want to be a doctor like the ones who helped Mai after the fire." My chest tightened. I didn't know what fire. I didn't know what loss was buried in that sentence. But that wasn't the point. The point was he was talking. I blinked back the emotions swelling behind my eyes and set my laptop aside. "Well," I said, keeping my voice steady, "we better get you some more paper." A breath escaped him, almost a laugh. We sat together on the couch for a few minutes in that hush that follows something sacred. He let me gently touch his hand for the first time when I handed him a new pencil. Then he wandered back down the hallway to bed. He didn't say good night. He didn't have to. I stared at the heart drawing long after he disappeared into the shadows. And for the first time since this all began, I didn't just hope we could get through this. I believed it. 2 days after Ethan first spoke, I found myself sitting in front of my laptop long after he'd gone to bed, heart racing, not with fear this time, but with possibility. I had typed into the search bar, "How to become a doctor." What followed was a black hole of web pages. Pre-med, MCAT, internships, residency. I scribbled notes like I was the one planning to take the exams. And then, with a sinking feeling, I opened a tab titled Average Cost of Medical School in the US. The number on the screen felt like a gut punch. $250,000. Before books, before living expenses, before life. I leaned back, exhaling sharply. The timing couldn't have been worse. I had just paid off my car 3 months ago. My savings weren't much to speak of, and my teaching job at the Community Literacy Center came with plenty of heart but not a lot of paycheck. And still, I couldn't stop picturing Ethan's face that night. The way he'd looked at that drawing, not as a kid showing off, but as someone revealing a piece of their soul. The next morning, over coffee with my best friend Trisha on the back porch, I let it all pour out. "He finally spoke," I said, wrapping my hands around the warm mug. "He told me he wants to be a doctor. And Trish, he's not just saying it, he's studying. He knew the anatomy of a heart better than I do." Trisha's eyes widened. "Wait, Ethan, quiet, closet-hiding Ethan," he spoke. I nodded, smiling for real for the first time in weeks. "He spoke, and he hasn't stopped since. He whispers mostly, but I can see the wheels turning, the questions, the hunger to learn." "That's incredible," she said, shaking her head. "I mean, that's a miracle moan, but why do you look like someone just told you the house is on fire?" "Because I've been researching med school," I admitted. "And unless I stumble into a winning lottery ticket or sell a kidney, I have no idea how I'm going to help him get there. I just paid off my car. My savings are laughable, and he's already talking about pre-med programs." Trisha leaned forward. "You're one person, Monica. You are doing so much. You gave him a home. You're healing his heart. But med school, that's huge." "I know," I murmured. "But how do I look at him and tell him no? After what he's already been through, I want him to have every shot, every chance Ashley never gave him." Trisha was quiet for a moment. Then gently she said, "Maybe it doesn't have to be you alone. There are grants, scholarships, programs. What if this isn't about carrying him? What if it's about walking beside him while he finds his way?" That thought sat with me. Warm, reassuring. And it was right. Because just a week later, Ethan started surprising me again. It began with a flyer he brought home from school. Junior Science Fair, regional qualifiers. He held it out to me like a sacred object. "Can I enter?" he asked softly. "You can win," I said without hesitation. We spent the next week immersed in his project, a hand-built model of a circulatory system using water pumps, tubing, and dyed liquids to show blood flow. He built it mostly on his own. I just drove him to the craft store and occasionally held a funnel. When he stood next to it at the regional fair, wearing a borrowed button-up shirt and the quietest grin I'd ever seen on his face, I thought my chest might actually burst. He didn't just win. He owned the room. A week after that, he came home with another form, this one for a scholarship competition for gifted youth in STEM. He had highlighted the words "full academic track support." "You think I should try?" he asked that night, standing in the kitchen doorway. I smiled at him over the pot of spaghetti on the stove. "Ethan," I said, "if there's a way, we'll find it." He nodded, then stepped forward and just for a second wrapped his arms around my waist. It was quick, shy, but real, and when he pulled away he whispered, "Thank you for seeing me." I waited until he left the room to let the tears fall, because I did see him, every inch of him, every hope, every scar, every possibility, and I was going to fight like hell to make sure the world saw him too. It came on a Thursday afternoon, slipped between grocery store flyers and utility bills, unassuming in a plain white envelope. I found it while pulling mail from the box with one hand and balancing a bag of oranges on my hip. The return address caught my eye immediately. Texas Future Scholars Program, Division of Academic Excellence. I froze on the porch. The oranges dropped to the welcome mat with a soft thud. I didn't move. Not for a full 30 seconds. Then I tore it open, right there in the sun, with shaking fingers. The letter was only 2 paragraphs long, printed on thick official paper. I read it once. Then again, out loud, as if saying the words might make them more real. Dear Ethan Whitlow, we are pleased to inform you that you have been selected as a recipient of the Future Scholars Full Academic Grant, awarded to exceptional youth demonstrating talent and commitment in the fields of science and medicine, the rest blurred. I pressed the letter to my chest and dropped onto the porch steps, heart pounding. My throat clenched. And just like that, the tears came. The kind that shook your whole body. The kind you didn't even try to stop. He did it. He really did it. Through every night of whispered questions about blood cells, every morning he left the house clutching his science journal, every time he handed me a new drawing and asked, "Is this how the lungs work?" He'd been building something quietly, relentlessly. And now this. I stayed there until the front door creaked open behind me. Ethan's head appeared, hair tousled, face squinting into the sun. "You okay?" he asked. I laughed through the tears. "Come here." He stepped outside, cautious, watching me like I'd completely lost it. I held up the letter, waving it in the air. "You got it, Ethan. The Future Scholars Grant, full ride, pre-med, med school, everything," he blinked. "What? You did this," I whispered, placing the paper into his hands. He stared at it, eyes wide, reading silently. After a long moment he looked up, his face unreadable. "That means I can really go," I nodded, tears still sliding down my cheeks. "Not just go. You're going all the way." A slow grin broke across his face. Shy, staggering, like the sun cracking through a storm cloud. He didn't leap or shout like other kids might. He just stood there holding that letter like it was the most fragile, powerful thing he'd ever touched. "Wow," he said softly. Then, to my absolute shock, he turned and hugged me, this time fully, arms wrapped tight around my middle, head pressed into my shoulder. I closed my eyes and held on. It was the first moment since I'd brought him home that I felt, deep in my bones, that we were going to make it. We celebrated that night. Nothing fancy, just homemade tacos, 2 cans of orange soda, and a slice of store-bought cake with "You did it," spelled out in mismatched candles. Trisha came over and brought balloons, even though Ethan said balloons were scientifically pointless. He said it with a smirk, though, and poked one with a pencil when he thought we weren't looking. "I can't believe this," she said, raising a glass of ginger ale. "To Ethan, our future Dr. Whitlow." He ducked his head, face red, but he didn't hide. After dinner, I found him in the living room, lying on his stomach, sketching a human skeleton from a textbook I'd found at a used bookstore. I watched him quietly, leaning in the doorway. All those days I'd worried about how we'd get through the next year, the next bill, the next meltdown. But tonight, everything felt lighter. Like maybe life was giving us room to breathe again. Just before bed, Ethan passed by me in the hallway. He paused, then said, "I still want to be a doctor." I smiled. "And now you will be." He nodded once, satisfied, then turned into his room and closed the door gently behind him. And I stood there in the hallway, letter still clutched in one hand, heart full. Because sometimes, even after the worst storms, the sky clears. It was a quiet Sunday, the kind that felt like a deep breath. The weather was soft, clouds low and full, the kind that made you want to nap or bake something warm just because. Ethan was in his room, reading a medical mystery novel I'd picked up at the library. He'd started leaving his door open more often now, which was its own kind of miracle. I was halfway through folding laundry on the couch when I heard the knock. 3 sharp raps. Unfamiliar, too confident to be a neighbor. When I opened the front door, I felt the blood drain from my face. Ashley. Hair pulled into a loose bun, oversized sunglasses perched on her head like a crown. She wore a thin smile I didn't trust for a second. "Hi," she said, like it hadn't been months, like she hadn't vanished after dropping her son off like a donation. I didn't move from the doorway. "What do you want?" She glanced past me into the house as if expecting to be invited in. "I was just in the neighborhood," she said breezily. "Thought I'd stop by." "Why?" Ashley shifted her weight. The smile dropped. "I want to see Ethan." I stared at her. For a moment I couldn't even speak. Then I stepped back just enough to let her in, not because she deserved it, but because I wanted control of the setting. "Leave your shoes by the door," I said quietly. She hesitated, clearly irritated by the direction, but complied. We walked into the kitchen, the room thick with the scent of lemon and mint from the candle I'd lit earlier. I moved on instinct, pulling mugs from the cabinet and setting the kettle to boil. I didn't know if I was trying to be polite or just needed something to do with my hands. Ashley sat at the table, glancing around like a stranger in a showroom. "You've fixed the place up," she murmured. I poured hot water into 2 mugs and placed one in front of her. She eyed it like I'd handed her poison. "No wine?" she asked with a faint smirk. "Not for visits like this," I said. She didn't argue, just wrapped her hands around the mug and stared down into it. Up the hallway, Ethan's door clicked shut. Ashley looked toward the sound and swallowed hard. "He knows I'm here." "He does." She looked at me, eyes glossy but dry. "He doesn't want to see me, does he?" I held her gaze. "What did you expect?" Ashley flinched like I'd slapped her. "I'm still his mother, Monica." "Are you?" I said, too softly to be kind. She bit her lip and looked away. The silence between us stretched, thick and buzzing. "You don't get to walk in here after abandoning him and expect hugs," I said, my voice trembling now. "He was broken when I found him. He wouldn't speak, he hid in closets, he ate like someone might take the food away at any second. You left a 7-year-old at a shelter like he was," my throat caught, "like he was nothing." "I didn't know what else to do," she snapped, finally meeting my eyes. "I was drowning. He was strange, Monica, always so quiet, drawing those creepy diagrams. I didn't know how to help him, I thought maybe someone else could." "So you left him to strangers?" Ashley opened her mouth, closed it, her hands were trembling now. "You want to see him?" I asked, standing. "Then you'll have to wait until he decides you're worth seeing, not the other way around." She blinked rapidly but still didn't cry. I walked to the hallway and gently knocked on Ethan's door. "She's here," I said quietly. "You don't have to open it, you don't have to do anything. I just want you to know." There was a pause, then, "I don't want to see her." I turned back to the kitchen. Ashley stood, purse slung back over her shoulder, her face was pale. "Tell him I'm sorry," she said, voice cracking. "I know I don't deserve—" "No," I interrupted. "You don't, but he might forgive you someday, that's up to him." She looked at me like she wanted to say more. But she didn't, she just left. I didn't walk her to the door. When it closed behind her, the house felt warmer. Quieter, I walked to Ethan's room and tapped twice. "Thank you," he said softly through the door. "You don't have to thank me, kiddo," I whispered. "You get to decide who's in your life, that's your right." He didn't answer. But I heard the soft creak of his desk chair as he returned to his book. And I knew he was healing, on his terms. The house was still again. Dinner dishes were drying on the rack, the TV was off, and the only sound came from the rhythmic tapping of raindrops against the windows. It had started raining after Ashley left, almost like the sky was letting down the tears she wouldn't shed. Ethan had barely said a word during dinner. He hadn't shut himself away, though, just sat at the table, eating slowly, eyes thoughtful and distant. I didn't push. I'd learned by now that he didn't like being cornered, especially by questions that didn't have easy answers. I was curled up on the couch with a blanket around my legs, flipping absently through a magazine I had no interest in, when I heard his footsteps. Slow, soft, deliberate, he hovered just past the doorway to the living room. "Can I sit here?" he asked. I looked up. "Of course, baby, come on." He walked over and sat at the far end of the couch, pulling his knees to his chest. He didn't look at me, just stared at the blank TV screen like it was a portal to some other place. After a long silence, he said, "I heard everything." I didn't pretend not to know what he meant. "I know. She wants me to see her." His voice wasn't angry, just tired. "She said that, yeah." He was quiet again, then softly, "She isn't my mom." I turned to him slowly, heart catching in my chest. "I don't want her to be," he said. His voice didn't shake, but his fingers did. He tightened them around the hem of his sleeves, pulling the fabric down over his fists. I set the magazine aside and leaned toward him slightly. "You don't have to see her, you don't owe her anything." He nodded once, still staring ahead. "But," I said gently, "can I ask what you mean when you say she's not your mom?" He took a breath, not a deep one, just enough to keep going. "She didn't come back." His voice was barely a whisper. "She never came back. She left me with people who didn't talk to me, who locked their doors, who told me not to ask for extra food." He paused, eyes flicking up toward the ceiling. "And I waited. I kept thinking she would come get me, that she was just sick or forgot where I was, but she didn't." I pressed my fist against my mouth, not to silence myself but to keep from crying. I didn't want him to feel like he had to comfort me now. "When someone leaves you like that," he said, "they stop being your mom. Moms don't forget you like that." "No," I said carefully. "They don't." He finally turned his face toward me. "But you didn't forget." I smiled softly. "Never," he nodded again. "So, I only want one mom now, and it's you." My throat tightened. I reached for his hand slowly, always slowly, and he let me take it. "You get to decide what family means to you," I said. And if you want me to be your mom, that's an honor I'll carry for the rest of my life. He didn't cry. Neither did I somehow. But we sat there, holding hands, the rain painting soft patterns against the windows like a lullaby. But even as my heart swelled, a quiet ache stirred beneath it. Because I knew this moment, this beautiful moment of connection, didn't erase the trauma that came before it. His brilliance, his progress, his future, they weren't antidotes to abandonment. They were layers. Growth built on scar tissue. I would never try to erase what he'd lived through. I couldn't. All I could do was stay, be present, be better. He laid his head on my shoulder as the rain deepened into a steady hush. She didn't want me, he murmured. I know, I whispered back, but you do. I pressed my cheek against his hair. I always have. And that night, as he drifted off to sleep beside me, I realized something with clarity that stole my breath. He didn't need her to come back. He'd already found home. Graduation night arrived wrapped in twilight, with warm air and the scent of magnolias drifting through the parking lot of Cedar Ridge Medical Center. I parked beneath a flickering lamp post, my palms still damp against the steering wheel. Inside the auditorium, the walls were lined with proud parents, mentors, and administrators. Some of them whispered excitedly about board scores and research placements. Others fidgeted in their chairs, already reaching for tissues before the ceremony even began. I found my seat in the very back row, near the edge of the aisle. Not because I wanted to hide, but because I knew Ethan would look for me there. That was our unspoken tradition. I stayed on the edges and he found me anyway. The lights dimmed. Applause rippled through the crowd as the graduates filed in, white coats crisp, their posture a little straighter than it had been months ago. And there he was, my boy. Taller now, shoulders squared, his hair neatly styled instead of the wild curls he used to hide behind. But his eyes, still Ethan's. He scanned the crowd once, briefly, and found me right away. Just a flicker of a smile. God, my chest could barely hold it. The ceremony unfolded in waves, names called, certificates presented, applause rolling forward like surf. When they announced the new surgical residents for the hospital, my breath caught. And Ethan Whitlow, selected as surgical resident for the class of 2032, Cedar Ridge Medical Center. The applause was thunderous. But I didn't clap, not right away. I was too busy watching him stand, walk to the stage, and accept his placement with the quiet grace he'd always carried, even when the world made him feel small. A few minutes later, one of the faculty members returned to the podium. We'd like to invite one of our residents to give this year's class address. Ethan Whitlow has something to say. He hadn't told me. Of course he hadn't. He stepped up to the microphone, gripping the edges of the podium with steady hands. He didn't need notes. He didn't need to clear his throat, he just began. When I was 7, he said, I lived in a place that didn't have windows. Not real ones anyway, just a hallway with flickering lights and doors that stayed locked. And I thought maybe that's where I'd stay, that maybe I wasn't the kind of kid who got out of places like that. He paused. Some people shifted in their seats, unsure if this was too personal for a graduation speech. But Ethan didn't waver. And then someone found me. She didn't just bring me home, she fought for me. She sat on the floor outside closets I was too scared to leave. She fed me when I couldn't ask. She saw something in me before I even knew I was allowed to want more. I pressed my hand to my mouth. Ethan scanned the crowd, but I knew he wasn't looking at anyone but me. She's sitting in the very back row right now, probably trying not to cry. The crowd chuckled softly. I felt my heart twist. I owe this night, this coat, this future to one person, the woman who saved me when I thought I didn't matter. He paused. My mom, Monica Rivers. The auditorium erupted into applause. The kind that doesn't just sound loud, it feels loud. Like waves crashing over everything. And I couldn't hold it in anymore. The tears came fast, hot, unstoppable. But not from grief, from awe, from gratitude. From a depth of pride that made every sleepless night, every difficult moment, every whispered bedtime reassurance worth it. Trisha, sitting next to me, squeezed my arm. You did this, she whispered. You both did. When Ethan stepped down from the stage, he didn't stop to mingle. He came straight to the back, where I was still wiping at my cheeks with the hem of my sleeve. He opened his arms first. I stood, met him halfway. No words. Just a hug that held every moment between then and now. I love you, I whispered into his shoulder. He pulled back slightly, smiling. I know, I always knew. We stood there for a while as people passed around us, shaking hands and snapping photos. But I didn't need a photo. This moment, it was already etched into my heart. This was our shared victory, not because he needed saving, but because when I chose to see him, fully, honestly, he found the strength to save himself. The storm hit just after sunset. Thunder grumbled like a warning low in the sky, and the windows trembled as wind pushed against the house in short, angry gusts. I had just pulled on my pajamas, tea steeping in the kitchen when my phone rang. Unknown number, local area code. I nearly let it go to voicemail, but some knot in my stomach made me answer. Hello, a woman's voice crackled on the line, professional but urgent. Is this Monica Rivers? Yes. This is Clara Reyes from Cedar Ridge Medical. I'm calling because Ashley Whitlow was admitted to the ER an hour ago. Car accident, it was serious. I didn't speak. She's in emergency surgery, head trauma, internal bleeding. We're doing everything we can, but we don't know if she'll make it through the night. The kitchen felt suddenly colder. The tea kettle began to shriek behind me. I turned it off with shaking hands. I'm sorry, I said quietly. Why are you calling me? She listed you as her emergency contact, the nurse replied. There's no one else on file. I pressed a hand to the counter to steady myself. Where is she now? Operating room 3. I hung up and stood there in the silence, the storm thundering against the windows. Ashley, the woman who abandoned her son. The woman who hadn't seen him in months, who left wounds deeper than even I could reach. And now she might die. I stared at my reflection in the microwave door, heart pounding. The face looking back at me wasn't sure what to feel. Then I picked up the phone and dialed Ethan. He answered after the second ring. Hey Mom, what's up? His voice, so calm, so steady, it made what I had to say feel heavier. There's been an accident, I said, keeping my voice even. It's your Ashley, she was in a car crash, it's bad. He was silent on the other end. She's in surgery at Cedar Ridge, I continued. They don't know if she'll survive. Another beat of silence. I hesitated. Then, Ethan, they might need someone qualified to assist. It's possible they're short-staffed tonight. I'm not asking you to go see her, but I am asking. His voice came low, cautious. Why? Because, I whispered, she's not your mother, not in the way that matters, but she's still human. And people don't always get what they deserve. Sometimes they get what we give them. And if you give this, it's not for her, it's for you, for me, for what we've built. He exhaled slowly. Do they know who I am? No, just that I'm her sister. You'd be another resident stepping in if they need hands. He was quiet again, but I could hear the storm on his end too, rain lashing against glass, wind howling through trees. I'll be there in 10, he said finally. And then the line went dead. I stood frozen for a moment, the weight of everything sinking in. And for the first time in years, I realized this wasn't about forgiveness. It was about choice. And Ethan had just made his. Operating room 3 buzzed under the harsh white lights, its air chilled and sterile, exactly how Ethan liked it. Focused, controlled, no room for emotion, no space for chaos. Ashley Whitlow lay on the table, pale and unconscious, her chest rising in slow, mechanical rhythm beneath the ventilator. The chart read patient, female 43, severe blunt trauma, multiple internal injuries, status critical. There was no mention of who she had been to him. Ethan scrubbed in wordlessly. He didn't speak when he entered, didn't blink when the attending surgeon gave the order for assist, and he didn't hesitate when he took his place beside her, scalpel in hand. He moved with the same calm precision he'd practiced for years, just hands, instruments, and muscle memory. Nothing more, clamps, sutures, suction, pressure. Her blood was just blood. Her organs were anatomy. Her face, bruised and swollen, was a stranger's face. He worked steadily for nearly 3 hours, not once glancing up unless prompted, not once addressing her by name. By the end of the procedure, her vitals had stabilized. The bleeding had stopped. They had saved her. He helped tape the last dressing, peeled off his gloves, and walked out without a word. That night, he didn't answer my texts. I didn't expect him to. I knew what it must have taken for him to walk into that room, let alone stand over her body with a blade and choose to save it. And I knew it wasn't over. 3 days later, I got a call from the hospital. Ashley was awake, groggy, confused, but lucid. She was asking for me. When I walked into her room, Ethan was already there. I froze in the doorway, unsure what I was walking into. He stood at the foot of her bed, hands in his pockets, posture relaxed, but his expression was unreadable. Not angry, not kind. Ashley looked up at him, her face slack with disbelief. "It was you," she croaked, her voice rasping from the intubation. "I heard them. They said a resident, someone stayed the whole time." Ethan said nothing. You saved me, still nothing, her voice cracked. Why would you, after everything? He finally moved, walking to the side of her bed. He leaned down slightly, eyes steady and cold. You're alive, he said quietly, not because you're my mother, but because she asked me to. Ashley blinked fast, as if the words physically struck her. I didn't come for you, Ethan continued. I came because Monica still believes in grace. I came because she asked me to be better than what you gave me. Tears slid down Ashley's cheeks now, silently. I don't hate you, he said, but I don't need you. She opened her mouth, maybe to apologize, maybe to beg, but he straightened before she could speak. That part of my story ended a long time ago, he said. I just came to close it. And with that, he turned and walked past me, never looking back. I stepped into the room slowly. Ashley covered her face with both hands and broke into sobs. Shoulders shaking, breath catching, grief finally uncloaked. I said nothing. There was nothing to say. I wasn't there to comfort her. I was just there to witness what truth sounded like when spoken plainly, because Ethan had found his voice. And Ashley, finally, had to live with what she'd chosen to throw away. The hospital room visit was the last time Ethan saw Ashley. He didn't say it outright. He didn't need to. His silence was a boundary, firm and final, and I respected it. Ashley, however, wasn't ready to let go. The first card came a week after she was discharged. A pale blue envelope addressed in shaky cursive. I opened it, skimming quickly before Ethan could even see it. Dear Ethan, I know I don't deserve a second chance, but if you ever want to talk, I didn't read the rest. I slipped it into the drawer beneath the kitchen sink. Not because I was hiding it, but because I knew he wouldn't want it. And he deserved the choice not to be reminded. A few days later, Ashley showed up at my door again, no warning, just that same knock from months ago. This time I didn't let her in. He's busy, I said through the cracked door. He's working night shifts, studying, building something for himself. Her mouth twisted, not in anger, but in that wounded way people wear when they realize the damage was self-inflicted. I'm not here to make things harder, she said. I just want him to know I'm proud. I stepped out onto the porch, closing the door behind me. You lost the right to speak into his life the moment you walked away, I said gently. He might forgive you someday, but that doesn't mean he'll forget. Ashley nodded, eyes low. Can you tell him I came by? No, I said, not unkindly. If he wants to know, he'll ask. She didn't argue, just walked back down the steps, a little slower than she'd arrived. Inside, Ethan was at the dining table, hunched over a case study with 2 pencils, 3 open textbooks, and a half-eaten sandwich. He didn't ask who was at the door. He didn't need to. Need anything? I asked. He looked up and smiled. A quiet place and unlimited coffee. I smiled back. You've got both. That was how he lived now, focused, disciplined, steady. He wasn't the boy who hid in closets anymore. But he also wasn't the type to celebrate loud victories or dwell on emotional messes. His way of healing was forward motion. Rounds, research, reading, repeat. Every so often I'd hear him laugh softly at something in a textbook or mutter under his breath, "That doesn't make sense," before figuring it out aloud. These small sounds told me more than anything else. He was living, and not just surviving but truly living. The ribbon was satin red, pulled taut across the gleaming glass doors. Sunlight poured through the tall hospital windows, warming the polished floors and white walls that now bore a brass plaque with my name etched into it. Monica Rivers' Pediatric Wing. I stood there, hardly breathing, clutching a bouquet I hadn't expected. The petals trembled slightly in my grip, but maybe that was just my hands. Next to me, Ethan looked taller than ever in his white coat, a stethoscope looped around his neck. His voice carried through the small crowd gathered, hospital board members, donors, press, and a few young patients peeking around their parents' legs. Some people spend their lives saving others, he said into the mic, eyes steady. But some save someone just once and it changes everything. He turned to glance at me, and I saw the glimmer in his eyes that matched the one rising in mine. I wouldn't be here without her. You all know her name now, but you don't know the quiet things she did, the nights she stayed, the moments she saw something in me even I couldn't see. He paused. She didn't just save me, she helped me become someone who saves others. The applause erupted, loud and warm, but I couldn't clap. I was frozen in the moment, heart full, eyes glassy. I looked at the name above the doors, not for glory but for proof. Proof that love, given freely, could ripple through years, through lives, through hospitals. Ethan leaned in, his voice low now, just for me. This is yours, Mom, always. And as he raised the scissors to cut the ribbon, I let one tear fall. silent, grateful. Justice hadn't come in anger or revenge, it came in healing, in legacy, in love that stayed. That was the end of my story. But one thing still lingers in my heart. Ashley came back, years too late, asking for a second chance. She said she was proud. She said she was sorry. And though Ethan chose not to let her in, I sometimes wonder, did she truly deserve to be shut out forever, or had she changed? What do you think? Did Ashley deserve forgiveness? Tell me in the comments. And if this story moved you even a little, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. I've got more to share.